So how many of you have finished Whole Hard 45? Would you stand up? All right. Awesome. Now, Al, I didn't check with you before, but do we have the booklet still back there?
We still have some. I'll make sure though.
Because I'm thinking about the guests with us and stuff. If you haven't, failed and had to restart, then it's really not accomplishing its goal. So, I think don't get discouraged. I want to encourage you to finish this thing out. I was talking to Anna, my daughter, who does a lot of our merch. And man, we got a cool shirt that's going to be for those who finish. So we do need your shirt size. And I know that some of you guys did it with your wives, and so make sure to give us their shirt size, and we'll be ordering those soon. But for you guys that are new or came since maybe in the last 2 months, we started the year with a challenge called the Whole Hard 45. And it's 45 days of 10 things you do every day. They're physical, they're mental, they're spiritual, and they're emotional. And we have the booklets back there where the merch is. And, talk to Al if you don't see them. But maybe between now and when I finish, we could just have them out there. You guys grab them. It's pretty self-explanatory about how to do it. And for you that might have lost yours or you need a kick to do it again, surely pick up another one. That's fine. We'd love to have you do that. Been talking about suffering and the importance and the value of suffering. George spoke about the life of Jacob last week. And the week before that, I talked about as an introduction to suffering. And what I said back then was that in most parts of the world, especially the East, and when I speak of the East, I mean Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, all the way over to India, there's always been historically a perspective that suffering is good. How many of you in this room, and I'm not talking about occasionally, but you are somewhat at some time in your life serious with martial arts? Raise your hand. Okay, so martial arts is built on the premise, all the martial arts are built on the premise that suffering brings wisdom. That suffering brings wisdom. And that the more you learn the discipline of that particular martial art, the more you're going to suffer. You are going to suffer to become good. Any black belts? Any black belts in here? Over here. Okay, a few of you are black belts. So you went through a system to get there that encouraged suffering. Well, we're all familiar with the UFC and MMA right now, and what Dana White has done in that arena. Well, there's a new group coming up called One Championship. And the One Championship's out of Asia, and I can't even say his name right, I'm sure, but it's Chatri Sityatong who has started that. He comes out of deep poverty in his background. You could do a lot worse than listening to him as you leave today. Maybe put a podcast on it and listen to him talk about suffering. It's really good. But I wanted to open with this quote. I always say that the path to greatness for all of us, for every person on this planet, is suffering. Suffering through failure, through adversity, through tragedy, through setbacks, obstacles, mistakes. It's that journey of suffering that brings out our greatness. And I really agree with that. That the way to greatness, the way to a meaningful life. And so when I say greatness, everybody has a different version of what that means. But for me, it's meaning. It's having meaning to your life. It's having a meaningful life. Meaningfully, spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally. It's having meaning in relationships. It's having a meaningful relationship with your spouse if you're married. It's having a meaningful relationship with your girlfriend if you're dating. It's having a meaningful relationship with some guys at your table. You see, life's not just about success. Life is about meaning. And when you find meaning, you realize that the way to meaning is suffering. because you take risk more. When you become a person who's pursuing meaning to your life, then you're going to suffer more, but it's meaningful suffering. How many of you have made suffering a part of your life because of stupidity? All right, every hand. One's not raising their hand, or even stupider. But we've all done that. And all of us have done that. And there's meaningful suffering. There's meaningless suffering. So here's what meaningful suffering is. Meaningful suffering is learning from your mistakes, learning from your failures. It's realizing that was a bad decision and then making changes in their life. Most men want convenience, comfort, and ease. The great sin, and I would call it the road most traveled, is the road of convenience, comfort, and ease. It's those counseling sessions that I've been in with men where they say at some point in the journey, look, this is who I am. I'm not going to really change that much, and she needs to change. Or my boss needs to change. And sometimes it's that blunt. Most of the time it's not, but that's what they're saying. So in 2013, I thought I was on top of the world. And the Mountain Springs Church, the church I'd planted 20 years before, my living room had grown to this big church. And we had a satellite campus. Things were going well. Until I was called in to my office by the elders and put on a forced 6-month sabbatical. Completely shocked. If you had hit me with a baseball bat in the dark, turning a corner, I couldn't have been more shocked. There was no infidelity involved. There was no embezzlement involved. It was an issue of my leadership. The word I still remember is you're an ADD leader. And you know what? In retrospect, I completely agree with that. But I didn't know at the time that God was going to take me through suffering on a road less traveled that was going to change my life. And so, as you guys maybe remember Forrest Gump. So Forrest Gump, if you remember the movie, the story, Jenny, his love, comes back to him. They have these idyllic moments and times together, and then one morning he wakes up and she's gone again. If you remember in the movie, it shows him with his Nike shoes on the front porch of his house, and he says something like this. He says, for no particular reason, I just got up and started running. And I ran down to the mailbox, and then I just kept on running, and I ran to the end of the county, and I kept on running. And and he keeps on going. And I ran until there was no place to run. And I think it's Santa Monica Pier or something, if I recall. And then he turns around and he does it again. Well, one morning during this time, I started walking. And I put on my shoes, and I just started walking and walking and walking and praying and walking and praying for 5 years. For the next 5 years, every day I walked 2 to 5, sometimes 10 miles a day, seeking God, weeping sometimes before the Lord. But during that time, God spoke to me this phrase 7 times, the road less traveled. And that's the reason the road that we then planted later is called The Road, because it's based off the poem. And The Road Less Traveled by Robert Frost. But here's what God did, and this is what I want to camp on briefly this morning, is God put a fire in my belly. God put a fire in my belly for holiness. God put a fire in my belly for humility. God put a fire in my belly to be a good leader, to be a godly leader, to treat people with love and to treat people with honor. And it wasn't all about me anymore. It was going to be about Him and Him alone. And if it wasn't about Him, I wasn't going to be a pastor. And I was willing to do anything He wanted me to do. I'll go back into gymnastics coaching. I'll go be a missionary, whatever. But God, you show me. And He showed me that the calling was still the same. And that is to build a great church by building a great people in a great city. And that was Colorado Springs. So I wasn't going anywhere. But it took fasting and prayer and walking to figure that out. But God put a fire in my belly to change. And men, if God doesn't put a fire in your belly to change, you will not change. You'll be the same as you are right now next year this time. You have to ask God to put a fire in your belly, and you got to take the steps to get it. In 1819, the Scottish pastor Thomas Chalmers preached a famous sermon called The Expulsive Power of a New Affection. Here's what he said. In a word, if the way to disengage the heart from the positive love of one great and dominant object is to bind it in positive love to another, then it is not by exposing the worthlessness of the former, but by addressing to the mental eye the worth and the excellence of the latter. That all old things are to be done away and all other things are to become new. I love that. In other words, it's not focusing on how bad something is that changes you from doing maybe the bad thing. It's focusing on a new affection that's so much greater than that thing that affection drives out the other affection. So it's not about saying I'm going to quit drinking. The question is why? Why would you quit drinking? And then you begin to focus in on that. You drive out the old affections by a new affection. You broke up with the girl that you thought was the soulmate of your life. And you continually wake up in the morning and you're still thinking about her. I would challenge you to not say, I got to quit thinking about her. But you've got to find a new affection. I would say falling in love with Jesus Christ and his people would be one of the best things you could do to get rid of that memory of that past thing. And if God wants to bring it back, he can, but you're not focused on it anymore. You're changing because you got a fire in your belly to be transformed in your life. Turn in your Bibles to Galatians 2:20. Galatians 2:20. Galatians 2:20 is my life verse. It's actually what is on the front of this podium right here that I look at when I speak. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. So this fire in your belly is to be crucified with Christ. It's being willing to crucify things in your life, and you are going to suffer. You will suffer to be transformed. But the fire is burning within you to change. So 3 ways I think suffering can build a fire in your belly. 3 ways suffering can build a fire in your belly. Number 1, and I'm going to speak from personal testimony. I became a man who was grateful for suffering. I became a man who was grateful for suffering. Without the suffering I endured, I would never have learned about the pride in my life. Without the suffering I endured, I would never have valued others around me like I now did. James 1:2, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect, complete, and lacking in nothing. So suffering has the ability, when it's rightly applied, to making you perfect. It perfects you. That's why in martial arts, a big part, any martial arts dojo, any sensei in the martial arts field should be saying to his kids right off at the beginning, if you aren't willing to discipline yourself in the arena of suffering, you need to pick another sport. So it's so crucial because they're perfecting you. They're perfecting you. And that's what God says also. Number 2, I became a man who could forgive from the heart. I became a man who could forgive from the heart. Now, that's a whole other story. I've shared it before about the bear hunt I was on and what happened at that bear hunt. I won't go into it here. We'll talk about forgiveness another time. But needless to say, during all those times of walking and being with the Lord, I did learn to forgive. And in each case, I went back to those elders one-on-one, and I asked for forgiveness from them for me harboring bitterness toward them for what happened. Now, I didn't get anything back. They were like, I got the impression in these meetings, it was like, well, it's about time. So if you've ever been in that position where you've gone and you realize someone's wronged you, but you took the responsibility for it, don't expect anything back from them. That's totally fine with me. I don't even think about it anymore, except when I speak on it, because I'm free, man. I am totally set free. So, and then number 3, lastly, I became a man who feared God more than man. I became a man who feared God more than man. A lot of the things that happened in that scenario were based in a fear of man, an unwillingness to say some things with authenticity, but also to be willing to hear the critiques that I needed to hear that I wasn't willing to hear because of pride in my life. And so God will do that through suffering in your life, and suffering can be a beautiful experience in your life, but you have to have a fire in your belly to be a worshiper and a warrior. And I want to challenge you to be that, to see suffering as a good thing, not a bad thing, and to walk in the goodness of the Lord in that. All right? All right, so do you see some things in your life that need to change? Do you have a fire in your belly to change? How can your bloodstained allies help you? So you guys, your tables, God bless you, and have a good discussion. All right.